So today we're going to talk about 4.5, the major plans for Reconstruction. So we talked a little bit about what Reconstruction was and kind of how are we going to take care of reuniting the country after the war is over. And there were three major ideas that we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about Lincoln's plan, we're going to talk about Johnson's plan, and we're going to talk about the Radical Republicans' plan. So Lincoln was assassinated not long after the war ended. And so he had already begun to have a plan in place for Reconstruction, knowing that the war was going to come to an end. And remember, Lincoln's goal here was still to unite the country. That's what he wanted to happen. And we can see that by this quote: "Act with malice towards none and with charity for all, to bind up the country's wounds." So here in this quote, malice is going to be about like having evil towards others. So act with malice towards none. So in other words, don't be evil or mean towards anyone. And charity, so the idea of giving for all, to bind, to fix up the country's wounds. So this shows that his goal was unity. He wanted to bring everybody together. And how he planned on doing that was what he called the 10% plan. And the 10% plan just said that 10% of white male voters for any southern state could pledge their oath to the Union reorganize their state government and then rejoin the Union. So this was pretty flexible, right? Only 10%, that's not very many compared to some of the other plans that we're going to hear. And again, the reason why Lincoln didn't require a lot is because he really just wanted to bring the Union back together. So when Lincoln was assassinated, Johnson was his vice president and took over after Lincoln was assassinated. So he's the vice president under Lincoln, became president when Lincoln was assassinated. So some things to know about Andrew Johnson that are pretty important before we understand what his plan was. One, he was a former slaveholder. So he was a slaveholder. He was a Southerner. And really nobody trusted him. Like the North didn't really like him very much because he used to have slaves. The South was like, well, you went to the North, so we don't really trust you either. So nobody really liked Johnson at all. And so he developed the Presidential Reconstruction Plan. And what this says was you had to take an oath. So if you were a voter, your state had to take an oath to be committed to the Union. And you had to ratify the 13th Amendment. So remember, the 13th Amendment was about ending slavery. So in order to get in, you couldn't just have 10% of your voters. You had to have your voters commit and you had to ratify the 13th Amendment. And really what Johnson ended up doing was part of this was also supposed to be to take the land and the property from some of the leaders of the Confederate Army. And what Johnson ended up doing, though, is offered over 7,000 pardons. So he allowed white Southerners, white slave-owning Southerners to keep their land. So they were supposed to have to give up their land, and he pardoned them and said, no, you can keep your land, which was very controversial. So because of this, because of Johnson's plan, Congress was run by the radical Republicans. So this is Lincoln's party. So they are anti-slavery. And they want to punish the South. And they control Congress. So they essentially took over Reconstruction from Johnson. After Johnson pardoned over 7,000 people, they said, you know what, we're just going to control this because you have too many connections with the South. So their whole goal here was the South needed to be punished. And they wanted voting rights for African Americans. So what they said needed to happen was they also wanted to see not just the 13th Amendment be ratified, but also the 14th Amendment, which gave voting rights. To be ratified before Southern states were allowed to enter back into the Union. We call that admitted back. In addition, they wanted military control of the South. And you can see that by the map here off to the side. Is the South was divided into military districts that were then controlled by the North. Now, as a result of this, we had two different groups of people. The first group of people was going to be what we call our carpetbaggers. And carpetbaggers were people that came to the South, so Northerners that went south, and they would take these carpet-type bags with them to put their stuff in, and so that's why they were called carpetbaggers. And some were looking for an opportunity, but many were like social workers or teachers and wanted to help African Americans after the Civil War. Many help African Americans after war. And then the second group of people that came out of this were what we call the scalawags. And scalawags were Southerners who supported Reconstruction. So what we have here in our Reconstruction plan was we had Lincoln, whose major goal was just to unite everybody. We just want 10% of the voters to commit to the Union, and we'll reunite as one. Johnson, who was a Southerner, so people didn't really trust him, went along with that, but also added the 13th Amendment to end slavery. But really then he went ahead and pardoned all of these Southerners who owned all of this land. And then finally the radical Republicans took over with a very aggressive punish the South mentality, put them in military districts before they can be reunited back into the Union again.